None dare call it conspiracy. Unveiling the hidden power structure? None Dare Call It Conspiracy is a provocative book that dives deep into the shadowy world of hidden power structures. It's a thought-provoking exploration that uncovers the machinations behind the political, economic, and social systems that shape our world. Published in 1971 by Gary Allen, with the assistance of Larry Abraham, the book quickly became a controversial bestseller, resonating with those who felt something was fundamentally wrong with the system but couldn't quite put their finger on it. In this video, we'll dive into the main themes, ideas, and implications laid out in the book, and why it remains relevant today. The context of the book's publication. To truly grasp the significance of None Dare Call It Conspiracy, it's essential to consider the turbulent political and social atmosphere of the late 1960s and early 1970s. This period was marked by widespread global upheaval and intense uncertainty. The Cold War was at its most dangerous, fueling tensions between the world's superpowers, while the United States was deeply divided over its ongoing involvement in the Vietnam War. This conflict was not just a military struggle abroad, but a polarizing issue at home, sparking fierce debate and widespread anti-war demonstrations that highlighted the nation's internal discord. At the same time, the country was undergoing profound social changes, driven by powerful movements that challenged long-standing norms and demanded fundamental reforms. The civil rights movement was in full swing, striving for racial equality and justice, while various other social movements, such as women's liberation, environmental activism, and the counterculture, were rejecting traditional values and pushing for transformative change. These movements questioned not only social conventions, but also the integrity and motivations of established institutions, fostering an atmosphere of skepticism and defiance. Adding to the sense of instability was a growing crisis of confidence in the government. Public trust had already been strained by the perceived mishandling of major events like the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Cuban Missile Crisis. However, it reached new lows following the Watergate scandal, which revealed corruption at the highest levels of power and led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon. The exposure of such political deceit further eroded faith in government institutions and left many Americans questioning the transparency and accountability of their leaders. It was against this backdrop of distrust, division, and disillusionment that None Dare Call It Conspiracy found its audience. The book struck a nerve because it echoed the growing sentiment that there was more to the unfolding events than met the eye, that influential forces were working behind closed doors to manipulate outcomes for their own benefit. At a time when people were already feeling that something was amiss, the book provided a narrative that resonated with these suspicions. The book tapped into this atmosphere by suggesting that behind the visible facade of politics lay a hidden network of powerful individuals and institutions who were orchestrating global events according to a covert agenda. It presented the idea that real power did not lie with elected officials or democratic processes, but with a small elite group of financiers and insiders who had the ability to shape the course of history from the shadows. This was a controversial but compelling notion, as it offered an explanation for the sense of disenchantment that many were feeling. None Dare Call It Conspiracy proposed that this elite group use their control over financial institutions, especially central banks like the Federal Reserve, to exert influence over the economy and, by extension, society at large. By manipulating economic conditions, creating cycles of boom and bust, these insiders could expand their wealth and power, while the general public bore the brunt of the financial hardships. This argument resonated strongly at a time when the U.S. was grappling with economic uncertainties, including rising inflation and unemployment, which further fueled a sense of disempowerment among the population. The book also linked the expansion of government and the growth of regulatory institutions to the agenda of this elite class. It contended that policies aimed at increasing government intervention in the economy and society were not necessarily for the public good, but rather served as tools for centralizing power. By gradually expanding the reach of the state, the elites could control more aspects of everyday life, thereby limiting individual freedoms and economic independence. In this view, socialism and big government were not just political ideologies, but strategic means for consolidating power within a few hands. Furthermore, None Dare Call It Conspiracy suggested that this agenda was not confined to the United States alone. It extended to international organizations such as the United Nations, which the book portrayed as vehicles for advancing a global agenda of centralized control. According to the book, the push for world government and the erosion of national sovereignty were part of a larger strategy to place power in the hands of a global elite. The book's narrative offered a way to connect the dots between seemingly unrelated events, framing them as pieces of a larger puzzle. It argued that many social, economic, and political developments, from the growth of welfare programs to the conduct of foreign policy, were not random or solely the result of democratic processes, but were influenced by a covert agenda. This perspective provided a sense of coherence for those who felt that mainstream explanations fell short in accounting for the complexities and contradictions of the time. By framing these developments as the product of deliberate actions taken by a hidden power structure, None Dare Call It Conspiracy gave voice to the frustration and skepticism felt by many. It suggested that ordinary citizens were not simply facing the inevitable consequences of natural social and economic forces, but were being manipulated by a powerful few who operated above the scrutiny of public accountability. This resonated with an audience that was increasingly suspicious of mainstream narratives and felt alienated by the traditional political establishment. Ultimately, the book provided a framework for understanding how political decisions and economic outcomes were being shaped in ways that seemed disconnected from the democratic ideals of public representation and transparency. It argued that the real power dynamics lay beyond the reach of electoral politics, hidden in the influence exerted by a small group of elites who used financial and governmental institutions to serve their own interests. In this way, None Dare Call It Conspiracy didn't just present a critique of existing power structures, it sought to offer an explanation for the widespread sense of disillusionment that characterized the era. By challenging the official narratives and suggesting that powerful interests were orchestrating events behind the scenes, the book resonated with those who felt betrayed by the institutions they once trusted. It presented a narrative that linked the discontent of the times to the actions of a hidden power structure, thereby providing an alternative explanation for the political and economic uncertainties that seemed to dominate the era. This critique of the status quo, combined with a call to question the true nature of power in society, made None Dare Call It Conspiracy an influential work for those who sought to understand the forces shaping the world during a time of significant transformation. The main argument: who runs the world? At the heart of None Dare Call It Conspiracy is the idea that the real power in society is not held by democratically elected officials, but by a small group of influential individuals and institutions who control finance, media, and government from behind the scenes. This elite, referred to as the insiders, wield enormous influence through financial institutions like the Federal Reserve, large corporations, and international banking interests. The book argues that these insiders do not act in the public's best interest, but instead pursue policies and decisions that serve to increase their wealth and consolidate their control over global power structures. Gary Allen claims that behind the facade of democratic governance lies an agenda of centralization of economic and political power that serves a few at the expense of the many. One of the core tenets of this theory is that socialism and big government are tools used by these elites to concentrate power. According to the book, the end goal is not to redistribute wealth equitably, but to create a system in which the elites maintain control over economic resources and limit the freedom of individuals through bureaucratic and regulatory means. The role of the Federal Reserve. A central theme in None Dare Call It Conspiracy is the role of the Federal Reserve System in the consolidation of economic power. The book paints the Federal Reserve not as a benign institution safeguarding monetary policy, but as a powerful tool for manipulating the economy to the advantage of elite bankers. Gary Allen argues that the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 marked a pivotal moment in U.S. history where control over the nation's currency shifted from Congress to private banking interests. By controlling the money supply, these financiers could create economic booms and busts enriching themselves in the process. The book suggests that these cycles are not accidental, but are manufactured to transfer wealth from the public to the financial elite through mechanisms like inflation and deflation.